श्री परमात्मने नमः। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। श्रीमद् भगवत गीता साधका संजीवनी 5th chapter Karma Yoga Action in Krishna Consciousness verses 13 to 26. The discipline of knowledge with its fruit. Having dwelt upon the Karma Yoga, the Lord now dwells at length upon Sankhya Yoga. Verse 13. Sarva karmani manasa sannyasyasते sukham vashi navadvare pure dehi neva kurvanna karyan. The embodied soul who has controlled his senses, having renounced the doership of all actions mentally by discrimination in the city of 9 gates, neither acting nor causing others to act, rests happily in the self. Comment. When a man is attached to the senses, mind and intellect etc., they control him. But when he renounces attachment to them, they remain under his control. 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, a mouth, these 7 located in the upper part of the body, while the genital organ and the anus located in the lower part of the trunk, these 9 openings have been called the 9 gates. This body has been called the city of 9 gates in order to clarify the point that as the city and those who inhabit the city are different, so are the body and the soul. As a person living in the city does not regard the activities which are undertaken in the city as his own, so does a Sankhya Yogi not regard the activities of the body as his own. Here a doubt arises that it is true that the self does not perform actions, but it can inspire others to perform actions. The clarification is that as with the rise of the sun, people are engaged in different activities such as farming, study and business etc., though the sun does not cause them to perform either prescribed or prohibited actions. Had the sun caused them to act, it would have been responsible for their virtues and sins. Similarly, Prakriti gets its existence and power from God, but he never causes it to act. Now the question arises whether God causes others to act. The Lord answers the question in the next verse. Verse 14. Na kartritvam na karmani lokasya srijati prabhuha na karma phala sanyogam sabhavastu pravartate. Neither agency nor actions does the Lord create for the world, nor does he connect actions with their fruits, but it is personal nature alone that acts. Comment. The term Prabhuha has been used here because the universe is created by the Lord, who is endowed with the attributes. He is omnipotent and he controls the entire universe. Though he conducts the activities of the entire universe, yet he remains a non-doer. All actions are performed by the modes of nature, but out of ignorance, a man identifies himself with nature and becomes the doer of the actions which are done by nature. The Lord does not decree whether a person will have to perform a particular virtuous or evil deed. Had it been decreed by him, the prescribed and prohibited actions mentioned by the scriptures, preceptors, etc., would have been of no avail, and a man would have not to bear the fruit of his past actions. A man has to reap the fruit of the actions which he performs. Actions being insentient can't decide their result. The Lord awards the fruit of actions, but he does not bring about the union with the fruit of actions. It is the man who brings about this union. He, out of ignorance, having become the doer and having been attached to the fruit of actions, has to feel happy and sad. If he himself does not get attached to the fruit of actions, he can be free from it. Question. In the scriptures, it is mentioned that the Lord causes those whom he wants to send to the higher worlds to perform virtuous actions, while he causes those whom he wants to send to the lower worlds to perform evil actions. Thus, the declaration, neither agency nor actions does the Lord create, nor does he connect actions with their fruits, seems contrary to the ordinance of the scriptures. Answer. In fact, the scriptures don't mean that the Lord sends them to the higher or lower worlds by causing them to perform virtuous or evil actions, but they mean that the Lord purifies them by enabling them to reap the fruit of their past actions by creating circumstances so that they may attain God or His love. If the scriptures are interpreted in this way, that the Lord causes the people to perform virtuous or evil actions so that they may go to the higher or lower worlds, the man will become dependent in performing actions, and prescription and prohibition of the scriptures and saints and instruction of the preceptor will prove to be futile. So this interpretation does not seem to be justified. When the Lord neither creates agency, doership, nor does he force anyone to perform action, nor does he bring about the union of the actions and their fruit, how can he reap the fruit of action? The Lord answers the question in the next verse. Verse 15. Nadatte kasyachit papam na cheva sukritam vibhuha Ajnanena vritam jnanam tena muhyanti jantvaha. The all-pervading Lord takes neither the sin nor the virtue of any knowledge, is enveloped by ignorance. Therefore, beings are deluded. Comment. A man can reap the fruit of action in two ways, by performing actions himself and by causing others to perform actions. But the Lord neither performs actions nor does he cause others to perform actions. So he has not to reap their fruit. The sun provides light to the entire universe and men commit sins and also perform virtuous actions, but the sun has nothing to do with those sinful and virtuous actions. Similarly, nature and the entire universe receive power from God, and with that power the people perform virtuous and sinful actions. But those actions performed by the people have not the least connection with God. The Lord has given freedom to the man whether he connects actions with their fruits or offers actions and their fruits to God. He who by misusing the freedom given by the Lord becomes the doer and reaps the fruits of actions is bound. The Lord does not accept his actions and their fruit, but he who by making the right use of freedom offers his actions and their fruit to God is liberated, and the Lord accepts his actions and their fruits. In the next verse, the Lord explains the glory of the knowledge which is illumined when ignorance is destroyed through discrimination. Verse 16. Jnanena tu tad ajnanam yesham nashitam atmanaha tesham adityavajnanam prakashyati tatparam. But to those whose ignorance is destroyed by knowledge, discrimination, that knowledge lights up the Supreme Self like the sun. Comment. A person identifies the uniform self with the kaleidoscopic world, etc., because he does not attach importance to discrimination. The striver who, having aroused this discrimination, renounces the sense of I and that of mine with the perishable world. His discrimination lights up the Supreme Self, that is, he realizes God. The Lord in the next verse explains how to reach the state from which there is no return. Verse 17. Tad buddhyas tad atmanas tannishthas tat prainaha gachantya apunaravrittam jnana nirdhuta kalmashaha. Those whose mind and intellect are wholly merged in God, who remain constantly established in identity with Him and have finally become one with Him, their sins being wiped out by wisdom, reach the state from which there is no return. Comment. God can be realized by two means. First, He, the reality, can be realized by renouncing the unreal through discrimination, and secondly, by thirst for the real. A striver through intellect should have a conviction that the Lord pervades everywhere. He existed before the world was created, exists now, and will also exist when the world has been destroyed. This is known as merging of the intellect in Him. In this verse, the term Atma stands for the mind. When a striver resolves that only the Lord pervades everywhere, the mind automatically thinks of Him only. When the mind and the intellect of a striver are absorbed in God, he realizes that he is naturally established in Him. Such strivers, instead of having their separate entity, become one with God. Their identity is merged in God, and thus they become an embodiment of God. The Lord in the next verse describes the attitude, vision of God realized souls. Verse 18. Vidya vinya sampane brahmane gavi hastini shuni cheva swapake cha panditaha samadarshinaha. Sages see with an equal eye a learned and humble brahmana, a cow, an elephant, or even a dog or a pariha, outcast, and have a vision of God in all of them. Comment. Here two adjectives, learned and humble, have been used for Brahmana in order to show his perfection, because generally a learned person is not humble. He becomes proud of his learning. Dealings of a sage with the learned Brahmana, a pariah, a cow, an elephant, and a dog must be different. The same dealings are neither proper nor possible. The scriptures also support this view. A learned and humble Brahmana, rather than a pariha, is adored. Milk is drunk of a cow rather than of a bitch, while an elephant rather than a dog can be used for riding. When the Lord says that sages see them with an equal eye, He means to say that they behold the Lord pervading everywhere. Therefore, they don't see with an unequal eye. Here a doubt may arise how their dealings can be different if they have an equal eye. The explanation is that we see all the parts of our body, forehead, feet, hands, and anus, etc., with an equal eye and think for their welfare. Yet, our dealings with them are different. When anyone is touched with our feet, we feel sorry and beg his pardon. But we don't do so if he is touched with our arm. We show reverence to others by bowing our head and folding hands rather than feet. The hand has to be washed if it touches the anus, but it is not washed if it touches the hand. Showing the forefinger and the thumb to someone have different meanings, which are known to all. In this way, a man has different dealings with the different parts of the body, but he loves them equally. He is not indifferent to any afflicted limb. He, through the likeness of the self, sees equality everywhere, be it pleasure or pain. In this way, the wise also have different dealings with different beings according to the difference in their food, qualities, conduct, and caste, etc. And it is proper also. They behold the Lord pervading everywhere, and so they love all beings and think of their welfare equally without having any evil propensities such as attachment, aversion, pride, and partiality, etc. They have an automatic inclination to remove the sufferings of other beings and to console and comfort them in the same way as a person tries to remove the pain of any limb of his body. So, it is said that they see everyone with an equal eye. The Lord has mentioned this equality of vision or even-mindedness several times in the Gita. And man should be non-dual in feelings rather than in dealings. An important fact pertaining to equanimity. Equanimity is not a child's play, but an embodiment of God. The Lord declares, those whose minds get rooted in equanimity overcome the world, birth and death, and realize the absolute God. This state of equanimity is attained when others' pleasure and pain become a striver's own pleasure and pain. Saints feel happy and sad in the happiness and sadness of others. Equanimity or equality does not mean that food should be eaten and marriages should be arranged without taking into consideration caste, creed, or color, etc. Equality in such dealings leads to degradation. It is the God of death who has equal dealings with all, because all the beings, whether they are saints or householders, animals or gods, have to die. Animals also have equality of dealings. A god enters a Brahmana's kitchen with unclean feet in the same way as it enters the kitchen of a sweeper, because it does not distinguish between a Brahmana and a sweeper. But the same behavior on the part of a man can't be ignored. Equanimity consists in removing the sufferings of others and in doing good to others. This kind of equanimity purifies him and his heart. Moreover, we should have the feelings that all beings should be happy, all of them should be free from diseases, and no one should ever suffer in the least. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukh bhag bhavet. Having such sort of feelings, we should do good to others. This is equanimity. In the next verse, the Lord explains the glory of equanimity. Verse 19. Yavatarjitha sargo yesham samye sthitam manha nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmad brahmani te sthitaha. Even here the world is overcome by those whose minds are established in equality, because God is flawless and equal. Therefore, they are established in God. Comment. When a person realizes that he is established in God or the self, and when he renounces attachment, aversion, desire, and unevenness of mind, etc., his mind and intellect naturally get established in equanimity. Though outwardly there is no obvious difference in the dealings of a great soul and a common man, yet inwardly there is a lot of difference. The mind of a great soul remains equanimous, flawless and quiet, while that of a common man remains uneven, defective and disquiet. The body, senses, mind, intellect, beings, objects, incidents and circumstances, etc. are different from the self. He who depends on them is dependent. He who attaches importance to them and desires them remains dependent, that is defeated. But when he renounces attachment to them and sincerely gives up desire for them, it means that he has overcome them. Only a defeated person wants to defeat and subdue others. In fact, no one can defeat others without defeating himself. For example, if a king or a scholar wants to defeat others, he will have to resort to his army, capability, learning, wisdom, etc. Such an equanimous great soul who has overcome the world is not tempted by the biggest mundane pleasure and is not shaken even by the heaviest sorrow. He has not the least desire for any beings, objects, and circumstances, etc., Though he knows the desirable and the undesirable circumstances and also makes effort to be free from the undesirable ones, yet they have no effect on his mind. The Lord in the next verse explains how to get established in God and what are the marks of such a sage who gets established in Him. Verse 20. Na praharshet priyam prapya no dvijit prapya cha priyam sthira buddhir asmudho brahma vid brahmani sthitaha. He who neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant, and who is firm of understanding and unbewildered, such a knower of God is established in God. Comment. To get agreeable beings, objects, incidents and circumstances appealing to the body, senses, mind, principles, caste, creed and scriptures is called acquisition of priya, agreeable, and what is contrary to it is apriya, disagreeable. When a striver obtains pleasant, desirable beings, objects and circumstances, etc., according to his desire, he should not feel happy. Similarly, when he meets with unpleasant ones, he should not be sad. He knows the desirable and the undesirable ones, but he is neither attached to the desirable nor has an aversion to the undesirable. Mere knowledge of the agreeable and disagreeable is not a flaw. He remains free from joy or grief. In fact, all beings are essentially and constantly established in Brahma, God, but by an error they hold that they are established in the body, senses, mind and intellect, etc. So they can't realize the truth that they are established in Him. But a great soul in all circumstances realizes that he is established in Him naturally and constantly. An object is established in another object, but establishment in God is distinct from it. When a great soul identifies himself with God, only God remains. He completely loses his separate entity. So long as he thinks that he is established in Him, it means that he has not fully identified himself with Him, Lord, and he still has his individuality. The Lord in the next verse describes the means of attaining the state of mind of the person who is established in God. Verse 21. Bahyasparsheshu asaktatma vindatyatmani yat sukham sa brahma yoga yuktatma sukham akshyam ashnute. When the soul is no longer attached to external contacts, he finds happiness in the self. Having completely identified himself through meditation with Brahma, he enjoys eternal bliss. Comment. He who, instead of being attached to the body, senses, mind, intellect, life, breath, etc., as well as to the objects of senses, such as sound and touch, etc., is attached only to God, is known as unattached to external contacts. The strivers whose attachment has not been totally wiped out, but whose aim has been to wipe it out, should also be included among those strivers who have renounced attachment, as they quickly get rid of it because of their firm resolve. This detachment is necessary in order to attain the state mentioned in the preceding verse, in which a striver neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant nor grieves on getting what is unpleasant. A man has a wrong notion that he can't live without external contacts, but in fact he can't live with constant external contacts. To forget all external contacts, he sleeps. Thus he regains freshness, vitality and health, which he can never get in the wakeful state. Therefore, he considers sleep very essential. Energy is procured through dissociation with objects. When a man goes to bed, he thinks to renounce his affinity for the external objects and also to work after waking from sleep. As he attaches more importance to the work, he does not pay attention to the renunciation of his affinity for objects. He sleeps and awakes having affinity for objects. It is very surprising that the person who was our relative does not live. That is, he dies, but our affinity for him continues. The reason is that the assumed affinity can be wiped out only when the person who has assumed it renounces it. As soon as he renounces it, he attains salvation, which is natural. In the next verse, the Lord explains how to renounce attachment to sense objects. Verse 22. ये हि संस्पर्शाजा भोगा दुःखायोन्य एव ते आद्यन्तावन्ताः कौन्त्या न तेषु रमते बुद्धा. The pleasures that are born of contacts are only sources of pain. They have a beginning and an end. O son of Kunti, no wise man delights in them. Comment. The pleasure is derived out of the contact of senses with their objects, sound, touch, color, taste, and smell. A man also derives pleasure out of honor, praise, beings, objects, circumstances, etc. Man is not free in acquiring sense objects. If somebody eulogizes the doctrines we respect, we feel happy. That is also a sort of enjoyment. It means to derive pleasure through beings, objects, circumstances, and states by body, senses, and mind is known as bhoga, enjoyment. Not only the forbidden pleasure, but the pleasures which are sanctioned by the scriptures must also be renounced because they are obstacles to God realization. Pleasure can be derived only by having affinity for the insentient matter, while it is a must to renounce affinity for the insentient to attain God realization. As soon as a person realizes that these pleasures have a beginning and an end, are transitory and fleeting, the effect of pleasure and pain is lessened for him. In the preceding verse, the Lord declared the pleasures born of contacts are only sources of pain. Then the question arises, who is happy? The Lord answers the question in the next verse. Verse 23. शक्नोति हैव यः सोढुं प्राक् शरीर विमोक्षणात् काम क्रोधोद्भवं वेगं सा युक्तः सा सुखी नरः. He who is able to resist the impulse born out of desire and anger even here before he gives up his body is a yogi and he is a happy man. Comment. This human body has been bestowed upon us so that having controlled the impulse of desire and anger, we may attain salvation. Every human being without any distinction of caste, color or creed etc. is qualified and deserving in controlling them. A man may die any moment, so he should be ever cautious not to be swayed by desire and anger, but he should control them here in this life before giving up the body. Secondly, it can also be interpreted that before the body starts functioning under their sway, they should be controlled. As soon as the thought of hankering after the pleasure comes to the mind, a striver should become alert that he is a striver and so it is not proper for him to get entangled in pleasures. He should immediately renounce this thought. Not to talk of men, even birds and beasts can't lead a happy and peaceful life if they are swayed by desire and anger. So only the man who has controlled these impulses is happy. Otherwise, evils such as disquietude, volatility, and struggles are born and a man can't be happy. A person who depends on the perishable persons and objects etc. and who wants to derive pleasure out of them by having affinity for them can never be happy. This is a rule. The Lord in the next verse explains the glory of the person who is happy within himself. Verse 24. Yo antah sukho antar aramas तथा अंतर्ज्योतिर eva yaha sayogi brahma nirvanam brahma bhuto adhigachti. He who is happy within himself, who rejoices within himself, and who is illumined within himself, that yogi identified with Brahma attains to the beatitude of God. Comment. One who is happy within himself is he who, instead of being happy in possessing the worldly objects, is happy only in God. One who rejoices within himself is he who, instead of rejoicing in external pleasures, rejoices in the self or in God during spiritual practice as well as in practical life. The Lord is the illuminator and base of all the mundane knowledge of senses and intellect, etc. Antar Jyotiha is the striver who ever remains illumined. The expression Brahma Nirvanam means the attainment of eternal peace without the least disquietude. In Brahma Bhuta state, a striver realizes that he is identified with Brahma. In the next verse, the Lord explains the glory of the Sankhya yogis who are actively engaged in the welfare of all beings. Verse 25. Labhante Brahma Nirvanam Rishyaha Kshina Kalmashaha Chena Dvaidha Yattatmanaha Sarva Bhuta Hite Rataha. The holy men whose sins are destroyed, whose doubts are cut asunder, whose minds are disciplined, and who rejoice in doing good to all beings, attain to the beatitude of God. Comment. The strivers whose aim is God realization have not to control their minds, bodies, senses, and intellects, but they are instinctively and easily controlled. When they are controlled, the strivers become free from evils such as attachment and aversion, and all their activities are for the welfare of others. In fact, Brahma, God, is attainable by all human beings, but having identified himself with the kaleidoscopic body, etc., a person has a disinclination for God. When his affinity for the perishable objects, such as the body, etc., is renounced, all sins, evils, and doubts are destroyed, and he attains Brahma, God, who pervades everywhere. The Lord in the next verse explains the excellence of such God-realized souls. Verse 26. Kama krodha vimuktanam yatinam yatachitsam abhito brahma nirvanam vartate vidditatmanam. To those austere souls who are delivered from desire and anger, who have subdued their minds and who have realized the self, the beatitude of God exists on all sides. Comment. The Lord declares that in the God-realized souls there remains no trace of the evil propensities such as desire and anger, etc. Those evil propensities are born when a man has affinity for the unreal perishable objects, that is body, senses, mind and intellect, etc. But when he realizes his identity with God, he has no affinity at all for the entire world, including his body and mind, etc. The strivers feel that they are not swayed so much by desire and anger now because of their spiritual practice as they were swayed in the past without spiritual practice. It shows that they have lessened through spiritual practice. It means that they can be wiped out also by spiritual practices. The strivers realize desire and anger are not so frequent as they were in the past. They are not so forceful as they were in the past. Their duration is not so long as it was in the past. But sometimes a striver feels otherwise, that is, he feels that they are more forceful now than they were in the past. The reasons are, through spiritual practice, the attachment to pleasures goes on perishing, but perfection is not attained. Secondly, because of the purity of heart and mind, a little desire or anger seems too much to a striver. Thirdly, a striver feels bad if anything goes against his wish, but he does not care about it. But this feeling accumulates. At last, the accumulated feeling explodes even at the slightest provocation. Other people are also surprised why he lost his temper so easily. Those great souls who have realized the self, which is the aim of human life, are called Viditat Manam. Such great souls here as well as hereafter remain established in Brahma, who is the abode of eternal peace. As a common man, while performing different activities, remains established in his body constantly, so does a great soul remain established in Brahma constantly while undertaking different activities, because he has nothing to do with that non-self. Asat. Om Tat Sat. All glories to Sri Partha Sarthi, Lord Shri Krishna. All glories to Bhagavad Vani, Srimad Bhagavad-Gita. Sri Hari Arpanamastu.